So in the last class, we have discussed uh, what is a thread, what are the thread libraries, what about multi-threading, and what are the various models which are used for mapping user level threads to the kernel level threads. Okay, so in all these cases, uh, the thread simply you just think a small piece of code of your process because your process gets executed by the CPU, by the processor. Okay, while executing your process, a part of it you can call it thread, right? Just like you just imagine on how what way we have executed our user defined functions in our C program, right? Now, let us look at about what are the issues that you are supposed to be addressed while handling threads. Okay, so already in the last class we have discussed regarding the fork and executed system calls, thread cancellation, and signal handling. Now, in our today's class, we will continue the remaining issues of the thread, and then we'll move to the next one. Right? So, in most of the cases, the data is shared among the threads. Because of the sharing of memory is one of the important benefit of threads, using threads. Okay. However, some threads need to have their specific data. Need to have their specific data. So, major threads libraries provides support for the thread specific data. That means major thread libraries means P32, sorry, Windows 32 or P threads, POSIX threads, right? Or Java. These three are called as most popular libraries, thread libraries which are using in the current world. Okay, so all these three supports the thread specific data known as a thread local storage. So this thread local storage will help the threads to share among the various other threads, right? Whatever the data which the thread wants to share with others, okay, that can be easily possible with the help of this local storage. So in such a way, we can achieve by maintaining, we can achieve the goal of maintaining a thread specific data. Correct? So this can be supported by all the modern thread libraries. So in such a way we can handle it. And coming to the scheduler activation, and this is very important. Scheduler activation. Scheduler means it's a program which will take care of uh, allowing the threads for the execution. Schedule your examination schedule. What is the meaning of examination schedule? What way your exams are going to be commenced, on which date which exam is going to be commenced. Like that, a schedule will be given. In the similar way, here also the thread activation means what way the scheduler is allowing the number of threads to be executed in what is the order it's supposed to follow. These all things will be taken care by this scheduler. Okay. Now, how it is going to be activated is uh, many of the implementation of the threads provides a virtual process between that exists between virtual processor. Physically, it was not there, but logically, what it does is what it does is it just you user will feel like someone is acting in between the user threads and as well as kernel threads. Especially in the case of many to many, there n number of user threads are there which are connected to the which are mapped to the n number of kernel threads. You can observe the diagram here itself. There are several user level threads which are mapped to the several kernel level threads. Now we need to have a scheduler which will take care of allocating this particular thread to the a particular kernel thread, user level thread to the kernel level thread. So here we need to have a mechanism in between this user level thread and kernel level thread. So what is the job of that mechanism? It has to take care of allocating this user level thread to the corresponding kernel level thread based on their availability. Right? So now what is that mechanism which is available here itself is that is what we are calling as a lightweight process. The virtual processor is known as the lightweight process. Okay, so this what it does is it allows the user level process to communicate with the kernel level process, one-to-one communication. Right? So now the number of kernel threads are available which is dynamically, because so whatever the number of kernels are available, if we have that much of lightweight processes, what happens in that case? Whatever the user level thread that wants the services of kernel thread will go via the lightweight process. Will interact, the user thread is going to interact with the kernel thread via lightweight process. Right? And similarly, the application maps user threads onto available LWP. So here two cases. One is LWP, that is lightweight process to kernel, because the virtual processor, this mechanism is exist between the user thread and kernel thread. That is just, you can imagine this intersecting point. This point, okay, you can imagine it is a lightweight process, right? Here, how the lightweight process is going to be communicated with kernel process, that is one aspect. Another one is how this user thread is going to be communicated with this, I mean, how it could be communicated with this LW is another point. Okay, that is second point. And kernel threads are scheduled onto the real processors by the OS, right? So which thread is to be executed at kernel level will be decided by the OS. Okay, so in such a way, the scheduler activation mechanism is implemented. Another important point here you need to remember is, if the kernel thread is blocked, that means lower level part has blocked, automatically what happens? Whatever the LWP that was connected to the kernel thread is also be blocked. So indirectly what happens? The user thread is also be blocked. All of you observe this diagram once again. For example, this first kernel thread has blocked. Automatically what happens? Whatever the LWP that was connected to this one is going to be blocked straight. So it causes, what happens if it was blocked? It causes the user thread is also be blocked. Whatever the user thread that it was connected to the LWP will also be blocked. So this process, in such a way, it stops the execution. For this, it uses the upcall handler. So which is the library, thread library, which is available in the thread library with the name upcall handler. So the call, the system call which is used for it is upcall. Okay. Hope you understood. So now you can observe the diagram. This is the user thread and this is the LWP. This is the kernel thread. In this way, all your many-to-many or two-tier environment, all the user threads are going to be connected to the kernel threads by using the virtual processor called as LWP, lightweight process. So now this is another important. Ideally, there should be at least as many LWPs are available as there could be concurrently blocked kernel threads. Suppose if you have only one LWP, you may not use this LWP to connect a number of kernel threads. If you have as many as possible, so that what happens in that case, all the LWPs will be in turn they will be connected to the other kernel threads, whatever they are available. Right? But by using single one, you cannot connect it to the multiple kernel threads. So that is the reason, if you have as many as possible LWPs, so that you can connect it to the kernel thread. Otherwise, what happens? It could be blocked, because Suppose if you have only one, maybe this one will allow to connect to the kernel thread. Okay, in this case, what happens? This was connected, even though this was blocked. Even though if you have number of kernel threads are available, number of user level threads are available, but you don't have virtual process mechanism available, virtual process mechanism to connect it. So that is the reason. What happens in that case? All user threads will have to be wait until the completion of this particular one. Hope you are all clear with this point or not? With this virtual processor mechanism will be used for connecting user level thread to kernel level thread. In that case, if we have only one LWP, what happens in that case? Here, with this one LWP, you are able to connect one user process to the one kernel process, one user thread to the one kernel thread. Okay. If even suppose in that case, if you have multiple user threads, what happens? The remaining all threads need to wait until completion of this first thread. Then only it will allow second thread to connect to the. So that is the reason. If you have as many as possible kernel threads, so that you can block n number of kernel threads. So that what happens? You are able to execute n number of user threads concurrently. So these are some of the issues that you need to be understand while you are designing a thread concept in your new operating system. So here all of you should assume that by understanding all these things, we are supposed to develop a new operating system which can address all these kind of operations, right? Okay. Now, let us have a look at it. Up to now, what we understood is a process and a thread. Probably both the concepts which we have discussed previously are, you may feel like they are similar. Then what is the difference between these two? Let us have a look at about the key differences that exist between the process and the thread. A process is a program under execution. It is an active program. Right? So, whereas a thread is a lightweight process that can be managed independently by the scheduler. Or we can imagine a piece of program which is already in the running state. Whatever the process that you have created, among that process, you can think about a piece. That is what we are calling as a thread. So that is the reason we are calling it as a lightweight process that can be managed independently by the scheduler. Right? It can be executed with the help of scheduler itself. Whereas the process, while executing your process, it needs to follow several steps. And a processor requires more time for context switching as they are heavier. Suppose if you are talking about heavyweight process, right? So in that case, what happens? Context switching, that means moving from one state to another state, right? It needs to save a lot of things before switching it to the another process, or before sending your process to some other state. It needs to save a lot of information regarding the current process, right? So that is the reason in order to save all these things, it takes a lot of time. Whereas in the thread lab, they requires very less amount of time, because as I told you, a thread in a multi-threading environment, all the threads are shared code segment, data segment, and files of the particular process. Okay, along with that, they will also maintain the stack, registers, and all. So that is the reason it need not to save a lot of information while the switching is performed. So within less amount of time, it is able to switch from one execution of one thread to the another thread, because it is lighter than the process. Okay. So processes are totally independent and do not share memory. So don't think confused shared memory concept and shared memory, right? Here the processes are, each and every process is executed independently, right? In that case, it need not share its memory to any other. Whereas shared memory is the common place which can be used by all the processes. It's not belongs to the any process specifically, right? Here what I'm talking is whatever the memory that was allocated to the process, right? In the PCB itself, we need to represent whatever the amount of space that is reserved for the process. Okay, that cannot be shared to any other process. Hope you are all clear this point. Whereas the thread may share some memory with its peer threads, because anyway, all the threads in the multi-threaded environment, they will write their code segment in the code, data segment in the data, whereas files which they are accessing. So that is the common area. Okay, thread 1 has to write something into that common area. Similarly, thread 2 can write like that. They can share the common area among the peer threads, right? Because the code, data segment, and files are common to all these peers. So communication between processes requires more time than between threads. Yes, as we have discussed, inter-process communication for whatever the mechanism that you have followed, that is either it is shared memory or message processing or sockets or pipes or signals or files, whatever the approach that you have followed for the inter-process communication, for all these things, we need to have more time when compared with the threads. Right? And then coming to the another important key difference is, if a process gets blocked, the remaining process can continue its execution. So let us assume that we have 10 processes. Okay, the first process is in blocked state. What about the remaining 9? Because here each and every one is independent. So that is the reason the remaining 9 processes need not wait until process 1 gets unblocked. They can continue their execution. Whereas in the threads, if the user level thread gets blocked, all of its peer threads are also get blocked. Whatever the subthreads that it will have, all of them gets blocked, because they are user level threads are dependent. The threads are dependent, whereas the processes are independent. And a resource consumption. Process requires more resources than threads. Process requires more resources, because if you observe the process control block, where we can keep process state, process ID, okay, memory, registers which are used, the limitations, and the other files. Like that, we need to maintain several information regarding each and every process. Right? So that is the reason which need to utilize the more number of resources when compared to the threads. Right? And dependency. Individual processes are independent of each other, but threads are the part of a process and so are dependent, as you are aware of it. Processes have independent data and code segment, as we have observed in the diagram. Every process is having its own independent. You can observe this diagram. This is the whole is the process, right? Every process is having code, data, and file segment, which is common to all the threads which are created in that process, right? So this is independent. This is the data of one process, and this is the data of another process. Here you can observe this is independent and this is independent. When we are talking about threads, they can share all this data among these three. Right? And all the different processes are created separately by the operating system. Right? Process in execution. A program in execution is called as process. Right? So which program has to be executed, or what way it is supposed to be placed in the ready queue. These all things will be decided by the OS. But where all user level P threads are treated as a single task by the operating system, because process is a whole that can be decided by the operating system. A thread is a sub part of the, you can imagine it is a sub part of the process. So that is the reason all the threads, because the entire process itself is treated as a single task. Right? And it takes a lot of time for creation, whereas thread, it takes a lot of time for, less amount of time for creation. Similarly, for the termination also. So this is the difference between a process and thread. So all of you remember that a process is a program, whereas a thread is just like a user-defined function which is present in the your main program itself, right? Okay. So that is the difference between process and the thread. And we just quickly look at about the difference between user level thread and kernel thread, so that the thread concept will become over, right? User level threads. User level threads are faster to create and manage because it can be done by the user itself with the help of application program, whereas in the kernel level threads are slower to create and manage because it need to be done by the operating system itself, right? And implementation by thread library at the user level. So the user level threads can be implemented by using the thread library methods which are available. Whereas operating system, in the case of kernel level thread, operating system supports a creation of kernel threads. So with the help of OS only, we can create the kernel level threads. And user level threads is generic and can run on any operating system because the application program, for example, if you have created Java thread, okay, so your whatever the Java program which you are running in the Windows environment may also be run it on the Linux environment. So there is no platform specific user level thread creation. Whereas at the kernel level means at OS level. So there it should be specific to the operating system. So the multi-threaded application cannot take advantage of multi-processing. So here I need to explain what exactly the multi-threaded application. So in the multi-threaded application, a process may consisting of n number of threads, user level threads, right? So all these user level threads are getting executed in a single CPU because the whole task will be submitted as a single unit to the CPU. So that is the reason it could be executed. But when coming to the multiprocessing, a single process can be divided into parts and each part may be assigned to a specific processor so that we can execute the process with a less amount of time. But here it is not possible with the case of threads. They cannot take the advantage of this multiprocessing. Whereas the kernel modules themselves can be multi-threaded, right? So kernel level threads are anyway they are executed at the OS level so that they can be multi-threaded. They can share. Okay. So this is about the difference between user level threads and the kernel level threads. Hope you are all clear with this. Or still, if you have any queries, please ask me. Difference between process and thread and user level threads and kernel level threads, or some of the thread issues. If you have any query regarding all these things, you can ask now. Otherwise, I'll move to the very important concept called as CPU scheduling. Make it fast. If you have any query, you can drop a message in the chat now. Otherwise, I'll continue with the CPU scheduling. I think no one of you is having any queries. Right. Now, let us talk about the CPU scheduling. It's very important concept. Not only your external examination point of view, it is also be important in terms of competitive examinations also. Like if you go for GATE exams or if you go for any kind of competitive exams related to your computer science, or even in your career interviews also, you may get questions from this concept, CPU scheduling or CPU scheduling algorithms. right? So all of you listen carefully, and wherever you feel difficult while understanding this, immediately raise the question. Don't wait till the last of this session, right? Okay. Now, what do you mean by CPU scheduling? So scheduling is the fundamental operating system function because all the computer resources are scheduled before use, right? That means whatever the extent or whatever the time that you are able to make your CPU is busy, right? So our main intention is always we'll try to make the CPU is busy, right? How it is going to process the jobs, that is what we are calling as scheduling. Now we'll see what way the CPU scheduling is done. So before going to discuss about this CPU scheduling, one should understand what exactly the CPU and IO burst cycle. So here burst means CPU burst or IO burst means the time that it holds. For example, if you're talking about CPU burst, that means whatever the process that is being executed by the CPU, how long it is present in the CPU side. You can see the diagram. Load, store, and add, store, read file. These are the operations that are usually done. During the operations are in the execution state, the CPU. So these all things are happen at the CPU, right? After that, if you need any one of the services of the IO devices, in that case, what happens? Simply, we'll suspend this execution and we'll put it into waiting state. Okay, so to whom it is going to wait? It is wait for IO. So whatever the time that is present at the IO device is called as IO burst. Whatever the time that it was spending at the CPU level is called as CPU burst. Right? So now CPU burst or IO burst cycle, almost all the processes may switch in between these two. Either the process may be executed with CPU, or whenever it needs the services of IO, it will go to the IO burst. Usually it is switched in between these two. So a CPU burst of performing when a CPU burst is existing, whenever if your process is having any kind of calculations, then the CPU burst. Whenever if you want to read something or you want to write something, okay, or you want to supply giving some input to the system, or you are expecting some output from the system. In all these cases, we'll go with the IO burst, right? So CPU bursts vary from process to process and from program to program. Whereas an IO bound program has IO bound program means majority of the operations in your program are IO related. In that case, suppose if your program consisting of 10 lines, among 10 lines of code, 7 lines are related to input output, like printf, scanf statements. In that case, we can call it as IO bound program. So in that case, CPU, the statements or the instructions which are executed in the CPU will be less when compared to the IO. So that it takes less burst time. Whereas CPU bound program, the vice versa, if you observe, out of 10 lines, 7 lines are calculation, only 3 or 2 lines are related to the IO operations. In that case, CPU bound program has very long CPU bursts. So that is the reason always all the processes may take constant amount of time of CPU or as well as IO. It depends upon process and as well as the program. Hope you are all clear with this point. What do you mean by CPU burst or IO burst? So the time it spends at the CPU is called as CPU burst. The time it spends on IO device is called as IO burst. Usually, every process is switched in between these two cycles for continuing their operation, right? So here we have two different types of things that are exist. One is sometimes the CPU burst may be large when compared. I mean, sometimes the IO burst is high. It depends upon the process. Okay. Now, whenever a CPU becomes idle, it is the job of the CPU scheduler. This is the job of the scheduler. Here, scheduler is not an hardware device. It is a mechanism. It is a mechanism which will take care of how effectively allow the processes to be executed by the CPU. So that is very important. Okay, so here the CPU scheduler to select another process from the ready queue to run next. When if the CPU becomes idle, when it will become idle, whenever it has executed. Suppose this is the process one instructions. Process one instruction. Some of the CPU burst cycle instructions are executed. After that, if any of the instruction requires the IO device services, in that case, what happens? Temporarily suspends the execution and it will IO device. So until it comes back after finishing the IO applications to the ready queue, the CPU has in the ideal state. So why unnecessarily wasting the time? So that is the reason the CPU scheduler will allow the next process for the execution so that will make our CPU is busy. So once again, we'll look at about the life cycle of the process in order to understanding the scheduling. Right? Now, whenever if your program wants execution, right? So that is what we are calling as create resource, create or new process or new state of the process when it starts execution. Once again, I'll repeat the same example which we have discussed in the previous class for understanding this life cycle. You just imagine hospital example. When a patient enters into the hospital, he need to be registered or he need to book the appointment at the reception counter by paying the consultation fees. That is what we are calling it as create state or new state, right? After that, the receptionist, with the help of the pharmacist, will do some of the fundamental tests like verifying BP, sugar, or something like this. Whatever the things that they can do, they will test all these things: height, weight. These all parameters or temperature. These all parameters are recorded and they are placed in the case sheet. That means whatever the appointment sheet that they were booked for, there they will mention that this is the BP level, this is the height, this is the weight, like that. Whatever the tests that they have performed, all the results of those tests are placed in the case sheet itself. Okay, that is what we are called as. After performing all the tests, he is ready for the doctor consultation, right? So that state is called as ready. So once he is ready, probably he will get a chance of the doctor consultation once his turn has come, because he may be the first person, or he may be the fourth person, or he may be the 10th person. So he need to wait in the job queue. He need to be wait in the job queue until his turn has come. Right? Once his turn has come, it will be moved from ready state to running state, because now the doctor is going to pursue whatever the problem that we have. Okay, you ask some questions and all these things. Okay, these all things happen. So that is the reason currently it is in running state. So during this running state, if the doctor wants to perform some other tests, or he wants to know the results of some other kind of test, what he will do? Suppose he want to check some parameters with the blood test. What he will do? He will refer the text people. You go and get it back. So that is the meaning of what is the meaning of it is it needs the services of other resources. So in that case, what happens? Doctor will not perform the blood test. You just go to the lab and there you can finish your and there you can submit your plan so that they will test it. Right? So from running state to waiting state. So at the diagnostic lab, you may not be the first person. If you are the first person, your request will be processed. Suppose if you are some other person, what happens? You need to wait in the queue, device queue, or the diagnosis queue until your turn has come. So once your turn has come, the task has to be finished. After that, again you need to be waited in the line for getting the appointment of the doctor. Right? Like that, the process is repeated. After consulting the doctor, he may prescribe some medicines to you. So by taking all these things, you may left from the hospital. This has happened in the similar way. The process life cycle, whenever it wants to execute, you can create that state as new state. After acquiring all the resources for the execution of the process, it will be moved in state from new state to a ready state. It will be waiting in the queue. Now the scheduler plays an important role. What way it will allow, or what way all these processes which are in the ready state are going to be executed or are going to be in the running state. That is what we call it as. The scheduler plays an important role in shifting the processes from ready state to running state and running state to waiting state. So the mechanism, what is the mechanism that we have followed? So here, if you follow first come first serve, that means whatever the job that was appeared or that was entered into the ready queue may be processed first, or longest job first, or shortest job first, or we'll allocate some interval of time to each and every process. Like that, whatever the mechanism that you have adopted here, processing the request, processing the processes which are in ready state. Right? Now, let us have the scheduling decision take place under one of the four conditions. The first one is, all of you carefully observe this, when a process switches from running state to waiting state. Now the process is in running state. When a process is switched from running state to waiting state, when it will be? Whenever, if an IO event or a wait method in the sense, what is the use of wait system called? Which is issued by the parent process. That means it has to wait until the completion of the child process terminates. Right? Until the completion of the execution of the child process, the parent process has to wait. Right? So any one of the two reasons, it may happen in any one of the two regions, the process is shifted from running state to waiting state. Right? So whenever a process is switched from running state to a waiting state, there how do we, after completion of this, again it will be moved back to the ready queue. Right? This is one case, switching from running state to waiting case. And second one is when a process switches from running state to ready state. Whenever if an interrupt has occurred, suppose now I am taking the class. If I got a call from HOD sir, immediately meet me. What happens? I will do. What I can do at that moment? Simply, I'll stop this execution and I'll go back to the HOD sir. And after consulting it, I'll get back to you, right? And I'll continue the next class. So, in such a way, whenever if somebody has interrupted this execution of the current process, what it will do? Simply, for entertaining or for processing the interrupt, simply whatever the current job is running, that will be placed in the ready queue. That will be placed in the ready queue. And third one is when a process switches from waiting state into ready state. When it will be done? Suppose whatever the IO resources or IO services that it required, if they are completed, then it will be moved from waiting state to ready state. Right? And when a process switches from, okay, this is what. And last one is when a process terminates. Simply after completion of this, it was terminated. In all the cases, so here now you observe what the job of scheduler here is. How do we make this CPU? Here running state means the CPU is executing the current process, right? So how do you make always the CPU is busy, right? CPU, before going to make it busy, first of all, you should understand when it will become free. When it will become free. So the first case is whenever it moves from new state to ready and ready to running, during the execution of the process, if it needs the services of IO device or a wait system call has appeared, in that case, the current process is suspended and it will move to the waiting state, right? So in that case, now it will become, after allocating it to the waiting state, now the CPU is free. In that case, the scheduler has to allow another process which is available in the ready state to get the services of CPU, or another process in the ready queue may get a chance of its execution by the CPU. That is one state. Second state is when the process switches from running state to the ready state. Okay, so an emergency interrupt has occurred. What happens in that case? It suspends its execution and it will be moved to the ready queue, right? So in that stage, now it is free. So at that moment, the CPU scheduler has to define the mechanism how it will allow the another job to be executed in that. So these are the four cases when the scheduler or when CPU will become free. If any one of these four cases are exist, then the CPU will become free. Suppose if you observe the last one, when a process is terminated, so a process has completed its execution. In that case, the CPU is free. So now the goal of the CPU scheduler is whenever it becomes free, it needs to define a mechanism how it is going to be execute another process so that it will make the CPU as busy. Hope you are all clear with this. These 4 points are very crucial and essential for understanding the CPU scheduling algorithm. All of you, once again, look at about the life cycle, what happens in this case, and when the CPU will become ideal. So these 4 points you are supposed to read once again. I'll give you the 1 minute of time to read all these things, or 2 minutes. Read carefully, observe this diagram carefully, and ask me if you have any question. Because this is very essential for understanding all the algorithms. So that's why if you have any query, will be clear right now. Make it fast. I'll wait for 2 more minutes. You just read all these 4 points and as well as by observing the diagram. Any query? Is it clear to everybody? LU14, is it clear to you? B850 Unmute yourself. 20B850 Okay. 19B8180518. 19B8180518. Unmute yourself. 19B8180518. Are you
Hello,
there
sir.
or not?
Yes, sir. Hello, sir. Sir.
Yes. Is it clear to you?
Yes, sir.
518. You have unmuted.
Yes, sir.
Is it clear to you? Okay. Right. So, because if you understood these 4 points, so that you can easily understand the scheduling algorithms, the purpose and what way they made the CPU as busy. So, these things are very clear. So that you are able to solve the problem, because here the problems that are existed. Okay. So, don't be confused. If you clear all these things, so that you can easily solve the problem. That is my intention. Don't think otherwise. Right? Now, here there are two types of, based on the behavior, these scheduling algorithms can be divided into two categories. One is preemptive scheduling algorithms, and another one is non-preemptive scheduling algorithms. Preemptive, before completion of the execution, if it exits from it, if it exits from the execution, such kind of scheduling algorithms are called as preemptive scheduling algorithms. Once again, I'll repeat: before completion of its execution, if it terminates from, or if it exits from the execution, okay, such kind of scheduling is called as preemptive. Suppose if you are looking about a time sharing operating system, what happens in that case? The operating system will allocate a fixed interval of time to all the processes. Okay, so let us assume that 10 minutes of time is allocated to all the processes. So for first process, it allocates 10 minutes of time. Okay, first process get executed 10 minutes of time. After that, still, if it wants to execute, CPU won't allow its execution, because the time allocated for the process one is only 10 minutes. So after completion of the 10 minutes, it was automatically switched to the next process, right? So such kind of scheduling is called as preemptive. Again, it will be get back to the process one after completion of all the processes allocated time. Okay, like that. If the process is exit from its execution before its completion, such kind of scheduling is called as preemptive scheduling algorithm. Another kind is non-preemptive. If the process continues its execution still end of the process, it is called as non-preemptive scheduling algorithm. Now let us have a look at what about these 4 cases, uh, whether they are preemptive or non-preemptive. So for condition 1 and 4, what is the condition for when a process is terminated? That means it have completed its execution. Then only the CPU will become ideal. What happens in that case? The process has completed its execution and then only it will be terminated. So this will become non-preemptive. And when coming to the first point, when a process switches from running state to waiting state, such as for an IO request or invocation of wait system call. So these new, in that case, a new process to be selected for its execution, right? So whenever if a new process has selected for its execution, so such kind of scheduling is called as non-preemptive scheduling. Whenever it continues the same process by switching among the processes, it's called as preemptive scheduling algorithm. Okay, we'll see elaborately in the next class about the preemptive scheduling, what exactly the preemptive scheduling and non-preemptive scheduling, and the differences that exist between the preemptive scheduling and non-preemptive scheduling, and then we will discuss about the scheduling algorithms. Okay, so that is very important concept in this particular chapter, right? If you have any queries, you can ask.